Dear learners, I am Christina Georgy, your academic counselor. Last session, we discussed the life and works of Spenser. If you were in class, you would have got a detailed idea. If in case you were not able to attend the session, please go to our playlist titled MEG-01. There you can find the recorded versions of the classes provided. Alright, so as I mentioned in the previous unit, we examined the shorter works of Spenser. Yes, there we analyzed the works particularly with respect to the tradition of courtly love. I suppose you remember. In this particular unit, we'll continue that exploration of his poetry, Spenser's poetry, but here we'll focus on the long poems, namely two long poems which are Epithalamion and Prothalamion. By learning this unit, we'll identify the ways in which these two poems reflect the diverse aspects of Spenser's life while sharing certain formal qualities as well. By the end of this lesson, we'll also try to identify the crucial differences between these two poems. Dear learners, let me remind you that for your TEE, this was a question. That is, to distinguish between these two poems, identify the major differences between Prothalamion and Epithalamion. For that matter, this unit is of great importance from your examination point of view. Alright, so shall we move on to the introduction? Yes, good. So, as I mentioned, both these poems are wedding poems. So, they deal with the celebration of marriage. But these are with significant far-reaching differences. Differences in what all aspects? Differences in treatment, style, and even intent. The Epithalamion, as I mentioned, is a form of poetry, but one thing to remember is that it dates back to the classical literature. By classical literature, we are referring to the Greek literature. Okay, so this was probably first used as a literary form by a Greek poetess. Do you know any Greek poetess for that matter? If I ask you to guess a name, what would be the answer from your part? Have you heard of Sappho? If not, please be aware of this name. Sappho is a Greek poetess, so she is probably the first one to use this term. So this very term literally means, what is this term in case? Epithalamion. So this very word means at the bridal chamber. Alright, and early it was referred to the song sung in celebration of the bride's wedding night. That is literally at her bridal chamber. What do you mean by bridal chamber? Simply the room of the bride. Alright, so before we move on to the text as such, before we move on to the elaborate description of the Epithalamion as part of your study material, I would like to give you an introduction to this work as such. Last class, somebody also mentioned that they would love to have such extra additional information. Is that still the same? Do you want me to speak about this? If not, we'll skip that part. Same? Yeah, fine. No problem. So, always remember, this was first written by Sappho for popular. This form was popular among the classical Latin and Italian Renaissance poets. We studied Renaissance in our previous session. I hope you remember. So this is an ode. What is the form of this poetry? It's an ode celebrating marriage. Whose marriage? Spenser's marriage with whom? Elizabeth Boyle. So if we move into the depth of this poetry, we can identify that this poem consists of 365 lines. 365 lines and 24 stanzas. Alright, here an interesting aspect is that within this 24 stanzas, 16 of them describe daytime and 8 of them describe night. 365 lines, 24 stanzas, within which 16 daytime and 8 night. Alright. Another important aspect is that here you can see the invocation to the muses right before dawn. That is one important aspect. Awakening of the bride, progress to the church, wedding ceremony, onset of night, final prayer in the bridal chamber for fruitful progeny. All these become part of this poetry. And there is also a refrain. In our very first class, what was the title? A Prelude to the Study of Poetry. I hope you remember Unit 2 of Block 1. We already discussed that. There I told you the meaning of refrain. Anybody remember? What do you mean by a refrain? I'll give you a few options. Is that a poetic device? Is that a stanzaic structure? Yes, somebody mentioned yes, VS. She meant she or he. I'm not aware of the person identity. Yeah, anyway, that person mentioned the right thing. Yes, repetition. Refrain means very often two lines keep on repeating, or the variants of these lines keep on repeating in pieces of poetry. So such an aspect is called a refrain. Alright, yes. So these points would serve as an introduction to the study of the Epithalamion. Remember, when was this work written? In which year was this written? That's important. You will have to study the years of the Epithalamion and the Prothalamion. Epithalamion is written in the year 1595. 1595. That's important. Okay, keep that in mind. Alright, so let's move on to, yes, that's correct. Sharat Krishnan, he has mentioned the correct years. Epithalamion in 95 and Prothalamion in 1596. You can relate and study. See, one tip that I would like to give you is that whenever you study these years, or whenever you study something like number things, always try to connect and study. Very often this particular date can be related to some events in our life, or the birthday of somebody, or such things are always possible. Try to find some relations, or try to connect it with your day-to-day life, and that could serve as an important strategy by which you can remember these years. Find your own ways to remember the dates, at least the most important dates. If you are regular to my sessions, I keep on repeating the important questions or the previous questions of each blocks. This happens towards the end of the session. So make sure that you study those sections, for there is high chance for them to ask something related to those areas. Alright, it won't be the same question, but it could be something in relation to those areas that I mentioned in class. Alright, will you be doing so? Are you able to follow me? Yes, good. Thank you for your response. So let's move on to section 11.2 as well, the Epithalamion as explained in your study material. So the Epithalamion is a carefully crafted song celebrating the poet's love for and marriage to Elizabeth Boyle. So you can always make notes somewhere near these written texts, like you can make notes such as Spenser into Elizabeth Boyle. That would help you remember these main names. So we all know it is written as the culmination to the courtship described and embodied in the Amority sonnets. In my last class I mentioned that is within this Amority sonnets itself we have 89 sonnets, 4 short lyrics and Epithalamion. I hope you remember, we mentioned in our last class. So this is kind of part of Amority itself. So it celebrates a legitimate form of sexual desire that between the bride and groom, that is the husband and the wife. So this particular poem carries multiple functions. Which are these functions? Obviously, it is a celebration of the wedding, the marriage. Likewise, it is also the celebration of the beloved, a celebration of legitimate passion, an ornament to the beloved, and also a monument to her. So here, Spenser plays multiple roles. Which are the roles? He plays the role of a poet, a lover. Remember the bridegroom. Who's the bridegroom? Spenser himself. Then he is also the master of ceremonies of the weddings, and eventually he becomes a husband to Elizabeth Boyle. So, poet, lover, bridegroom, master, and husband. All these are the multiple roles played by Spenser here. How many stanzas are there in this poem? In Epithalamion, I already mentioned. Correct. Thank you, Athira, Lakshmi, Sharath, and others. So there are 24 stanzas, and each of these stanzas represent the hours of the day. So therefore, there is a total of 365 long lines of 5 feet. And they represent the days of the year. 365, the days of the year. And the poem draws together the universal and the temporal. This is also important. I have seen questions from this area. The idea of a love that is divine and transcendental with a more earthly and sensual love. That is, this poem seeks to celebrate the eternal in the temporal, the divine in the moral. To explain it in simple terms, Spenser's conception of love is firmly located in time. Alright, the element of time or temporality is central to the crafting of the Epithalamion. Not just in its formal aspects, but at the level of theme of love and its treatment as well. So the one question that is probably from this unit would be, define the elements of time or temporality with respect to the Epithalamion, or something like that. That could be a question. For example, for the TEE December 16, that is for the December 2016 MEG-01 term and examination, one of the questions, essay questions for 20 mark was to analyze time and temporality in the Epithalamion and the Prothalamion. So after reading, understanding and studying these two poems, you must think about how to analyze the time and temporality of these two poems. So moving on to the temporal element, this refrain is of great importance here. An essential aspect of this temporal element is the refrain of the stanza, which are variations of the last line of the first stanza. So the last line of the first stanza is kind of modified in almost every stanza, and therefore it becomes a refrain, a repetition. The woods shall to me answer and my echo ring. That is the refrain. Those who are preparing for NTA or PSC or SET or anything relevant with respect to English literature, make sure that you learn this refrain. The refrain in Epithalamion. The woods shall to me an answer and my echo ring. So through the refrain and its variations, what does the poet do? What does Spenser do? He manages to suggest continuity as well as change. It is a suggestion that is born out of the images that are repeated. Which are the images that are repeated here? The woods and the echo. You can read the elaborative content given here as per your time. Let's now focus on the chief aspects to be discussed in class. The allocation of 16 stanzas with a positive refrain and 8 with a negative one. 16 and 8, that is what I already discussed. 16 describe daytime and 8 describe nighttime. So it is mentioned that it is not coincidental. Okay, it matches the number of hours of daylight and dark respectively. This is the second last paragraph of page number 31. I hope you found those things. Yes, now comes the invocation of muses. That is also explained there. The muses are then invited to participate in the wedding as bridesmaids. You know the traditional Christian weddings, right? So in the traditional Christian weddings, especially in the West, what they do is that there will be a bridesmaid. There will be the bride and there will be bridesmaids. There will be maid of honor, and things like that. You must have seen in movies at least. These days, even in Kerala, some category of Christians are following such things. Yes. So that is the part there. Now the poem itself has approximately 5 moments in terms of dramatic action. That is important. The first can be considered from stanzas 1 to 8. These stanzas set out the poem's purpose and its means of accomplishing the purpose and the pastoral setting of the event. The second category is from stanzas 9 to 13. Here, the beloved's beauty is appreciated. And the third is from 14 to 16. Celebrations after the wedding happens. Yes, from 18 to 24, the poet expresses the bridegroom's fears and anxieties, and they also seek the blessings of all the gods for their reunion. Just make sure that you read those areas. One thing that you should note is that the poet's conception of his beloved, who's the poet and who's the beloved, you should always have that in mind. So these conceptions remain peculiarly external and voyeuristic. So here comes a term used commonly in gender studies. What do you mean by voyeuristic? The word meaning, any idea? Voyeurism means watching tendencies of people. That is, the interest in observing people while they are, say, naked or engaged in sexual activities, etc. So here also what is happening is that this lady is being objectified. That is a common term, objectification. Do you know the meaning of objectification? See, we can say that even while the female figure here is celebrated in all her beauty, it is both physical and spiritual in nature. Right. So in stanzas, yes, Lakshmi is correct. In stanzas 10 and 11 in particular, objectify her so completely that we may picture her. Alright, so the sense of objectification is intensified by the fragmenting of the body of the bride into attractive or seductive parts. Yes, I've been receiving a lot of text messages in response to the term objectification. See, to simply describe objectification, it could mean that to degrade someone to the status of a mere object. A person is considered as if a object, treating a person like a thing, or rather a pleasurable object because of her beauty for that matter. Yes, all such things could be part of objectification. So as I mentioned here, you can see a few lines from the Epithalamion. Her godly eyes like sapphires shining bright, her forehead ivory white, her cheeks like apples with the sun hath red, her lips like cherries charming men to bite. Okay, so here you can see that each and every body part is being fragmented and described. That is what we say objectification. So this is part of gender studies and feminism. If you're interested in learning feminism, go check out the video that I have uploaded based on feminism and feminist theories. That will be your study area when you come for MEG-05 program, which is literary criticism and theory. So these aspects of the lady are praised as being superior to the physical beauty described in the previous stanza. Okay, so metaphors of the virtues as a queen, such things are also mentioned. Just read when you have time and understand. The poem is a celebration of the wedding and of the nuptial union. Such an erasure of feminine desire suggests that the poet does not see his beloved as a subjective individual with her own feeling and emotion, but as an object desirable and to be acquired. That is the essence of what's been said here. Nevertheless, we can say that Epithalamion is a unique poem, that too of the 16th century, because it was probably the first English wedding poem to announce itself explicitly as one. That means it was the first poem in English to proclaim as if a wedding poem. Yes. And it offers a rich tapestry of sensual imagery that borrows as much from classical legends and myths as from Christian ideas and beliefs. That is, the imagery, the rich fine imagery used in his poem are mainly derived from the legends, myths, and also from Christian ideals, beliefs, etc. So in fact, we can say it is this fusion that it achieves of diverse poetic traditions and of oppositional religious beliefs that makes this a phenomenal work. This poem is considered as a very successful fusion of diverse poetic traditions and style. So that's all regarding the Epithalamion. Make sure that you study this session with respect to your TEE. Read the text if possible, it is given in the appendix. Then read and understand the study material. Alright, yes. Now shall we move on to the Prothalamion? So if you want to read the text of the Epithalamion, it is available on page number 38.